Welcome back, and we are going to continue with Church History 1, Lecture 4 from Semester 1, and this is Part B of Lecture 4. Okay, make sure that you've got your notes. Just download the notes from the YouTube website. And if you have your notes, we're starting from page 3. Examples of the Pope's rule over kings. So the following are just a few examples, because there are many examples, but just a few examples of how the medieval popes ruled over kings and princes. Now, the medieval popes ruled during the Dark Ages. Excuse me. Which was actually the golden age for the Catholic Church. The Dark Ages, for everybody else, was the golden age for the Roman Catholic Church. Now, in the first half of the 9th century, the Emperor Louis, son of Charlemagne, was humbled by the Pope and forced to abdicate his throne and perform perpetual penance. He prostrated himself before Catholic authorities on a cloth made of hair. He had to read a confession before them. He had to remove his sword and royal robes. And was thereafter held prisoner in a Catholic monastery. Pope Gregory VII, also known as Hildebrand, humbled Emperor Henry IV in the year 1076. The Pope called a council of bishops and proclaimed that the emperor could no longer rule his kingdom. Quote, "In the name of Almighty God, and by your authority," that of the council, "I prohibit Henry from governing the Teutonic Kingdom and Italy. I release all Christians from their oath of allegiance to him, and I strictly forbid all persons to serve or attend him as king." Now that's the end of the quote. In January 1077, the emperor travelled to Italy to the castle where the Pope was staying and begged his forgiveness. The haughty Pope forced the emperor to stay outside in the winter cold, barefoot and fasting for 3 days. After that, he was allowed to humble himself before the feet of the Pope and was granted absolution after professing allegiance to the Pope in all things. Pope Innocent III humbled King John of England. Now, Pope Innocent III ruled between 1199 and 1216. The king did things that displeased the Pope, so the Pope excommunicated him and issued a decree declaring that he was no longer the king and releasing the people of England from obeying him. The Pope ordered King Philip of France to organize an army and a navy to overthrow John. And obviously King Philip of France began to do this with great zeal, eager to conquer England for himself. The Pope also called for a crusade against John, promising the participants remission of sins, and a share of the spoils of war. In the meantime, King John submitted to the Pope, pledging complete allegiance to him in all things, and resigning England and Ireland into the Pope's hands. The following is a quote from the oath that King John signed on May the 15th, 1213. Quote, I, John, by the grace of God, King of England and Lord of Ireland, in order to expiate my sins, from my own free will and the advice of my barons, give to the Church of Rome, to Pope Innocent and his successors, the kingdom of England and all other prerogatives of my crown. I will hereafter hold them as the Pope's vassal. I will be faithful to God, to the Church of Rome, to the Pope my master, and to his successors legitimately elected. That's the end of the quote. This type of thing continued for hundreds of years as the popes declared themselves rulers over the thrones of the world. Even today, the Pope wields political power. The Vatican is a sovereign nation, very small, but it is sovereign, and has political ambassadors to the nations, including the United States and England. Let's look at Revelation. Okay, before we do that, I was just looking at pictures of the popes in various thrones or chairs. There's a picture of the Pope in a beautiful golden chair, a gilded chair. It looks like it's made out of gold or covered with gold and red upholstery, very, very rich. And then there is a picture of Pope Francis sitting in a chair made out of bones. So they took the bones of the monks, I don't know if the monks gave them permission or not, and they made various decorations. In this case, they've made a chair for the Pope to sit on. So the Catholic Church has always been fascinated by bones, for example. Now let's look at Revelation chapter 17, verses 1b, or the second part of verse 1, all the way through to verse 2. Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. That's the end of those verses. And then let's move on to Revelation chapter 17, verses 17 and 18. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. That's the end of that reading. Let's look at the decretals. Decretals. Since there is no authority for the papacy in the New Testament, it must be found elsewhere. Oh, did you know that? There's no authority for the Pope or the papacy in the New Testament. Where does this come from then? This problem was solved with the alleged discovery of official documents from the early centuries promoting papal supremacy. The first of these was, and I quote, the donation of Constantine in the 8th century. So they find this document called the Donation of Constantine in the 8th century, and that supported the papacy. And it is alleged to have been written in 315. Now, the canon of the Bible was closed by the year 100, and so this is way after the closing of the canon of the New Testament. The donation claimed that the Emperor Constantine had given the land of Italy and the city of Rome to the popes in perpetuity. By this forgery, Pope Stephen III, who ruled from 752 to 757, convinced Emperor Pepin of the Franks, the father of Charlemagne, to take some 20 cities by force of arms from the Lombards and to hand them over to him. The next and more important decretals were fabricated about the 9th century under the name of the, and this is a quote, Decretals of Isidore. Decretals of Isidore. They claimed to be a collection of letters and decrees by bishops of Rome and church councils in the early centuries after the apostles. Okay, so they were after the apostles. The decretals claimed that the Pope was supreme from the beginning of the church and that everything is subject to him. Pope Nicholas I, who ruled from 858 to 867, promoted this forgery in his day, claiming that popes, and this is the quotation, held the place of God on earth. Whoa. So he claimed that popes held the place of God on earth, with power over kings and even the right to command massacres of those who oppose him. To the decretals was added many other decrees by various popes, including Pope Innocent III, 1198 to 1216, Honorius III, 1216 to 1227, Gregory IX in 1234, Boniface VIII in 1298, Clement V in 1313, and John the 22nd in 1340. The phony decretals form the foundation of Rome's canon law. In a nutshell, the decretals state that all authority is given to the Pope, that kings are subject to him, that all laws must conform to his will, that kings are required to destroy all heretics from their territories, that the Pope has the right to depose kings who do not obey him, that citizens do not have to obey kings or magistrates who are not subject to the Pope, that all heretics are to be punished, and etc., and etc. Okay, so we're not going to go too deeply into the decretals, but following are some statements from the decretals. Okay, this is a quotation. We ordain that kings and bishops and nobles, who shall permit the decrees of the Bishop of Rome in anything to be violated shall be accursed and be forever guilty before God as transgressors against the Catholic faith. And that's the end of the quote. Now that comes from Corpus Juris Canonica Decreti. Now, a heretic, what is a heretic according to the Catholic Pope? A heretic is one who, in whatever way or by whatever vain argument, is led away and dissents from the Orthodox faith and Catholic religion, which is professed by the Church of Rome. Okay, that's the end of that quote. So if you differ in any way from the Church of Rome, you are therefore a heretic. So if you don't agree with everything that the Roman Catholic teaches, you are a heretic, regardless of if it's contrary to the Bible or not. If you don't agree with Rome, you are a heretic. So that comes from a decretal of Pope Gregory IX. So let's look at another quote. And all heretics of both sexes and of every name we damn to perpetual infamy. We declare hostility against them. We account them accursed and their goods confiscated, nor can they ever enjoy their property or their children succeed to their inheritance, inasmuch as they grievously offend against the eternal as well as the temporal king. That's the end of the quote. So what they're basically saying there, that the whole family will suffer. They will disconnect them from the inheritance. They'll confiscate all their property, and of course that all goes to the Catholic Church. Okay, so that was a decretal of Pope Honorius II. Now let's look at this next quote from a decretal. Quote, those are not to be accounted homicides who, fired with zeal for Mother Church, may have killed excommunicated persons. The end of quote. There was a decretal of Pope Gregory VII. Wow. So if you killed somebody, it's not murder or homicide, as long as they excommunicated out the church. So if you want to kill people, wait for somebody to get excommunicated and go and kill them, because that's not murder. What a terrible thing to believe. And let's go on. Let's have a look at Christianity was forced upon people. So the Catholic Church came and they forced Christianity on the people, regardless of what they believed in. But of course, their brand of Christianity, they had to take over the brand of Christianity, which was not pure Christianity. It was an apostatized version of Christianity. The gospel went to England during the days of the apostles, in other words, before the year 100, or soon thereafter, or soon after the year 100. And there is a continual heritage of Bible faith in Britain, in spite of fierce persecutions, which lasted until the 1700s. Wow, it's well over 1,000 years. Tertullian, writing around 200 AD, said that Christianity was established in the remote regions of the Roman Empire, including Britannorum in accessa Romanus loca. In other words, that means places of the British not approached by the Romans. So places of the British not approached by the Romans, there were pockets of Christianity. Amen. In about 169 AD, King Lucius was converted and baptized and sought to lead his people according to God's will. There is a brass plaque in the Church of St. Peter's, Cornhill, that states that Lucius established a church in London then, so at about around that time. Before this, England was a pagan land, filled with the grossest form of idolatry, including the practice of human sacrifices. Baptist historian Thomas Crosby concluded that infant baptism was not practiced in England during the first 3 centuries. The true Christian doctrine and form of worship as delivered by the apostles was maintained in England, and the Romish government and ceremonies zealously withstood all the way until the Saxons entered into Britain about the year 448. And when the Saxons entered into Britain, 448, during this time, there is no mention of any baptizing in England, but adult persons only being baptized. That comes from Crosby 2, page 12. Under the Emperor Diocletian in about 300 AD, the fierce Roman government persecutions reached as far as the Christians in England. Their books and churches were burnt and many were put to death. Now let's look briefly at the Saxons. The Saxons lived in an area of northern Germany and are first mentioned in history soon after the days of the apostles. They overcame various other tribes in the area of Germany in the next centuries. And in the 5th and 6th centuries, some of them invaded Britain, specifically the year 448, joined by other tribes from Germany, the Angles and the Jutes. Okay, so the Saxons went in first, and then the Angles, and finally the Jutes came in. By the beginning of the 7th century, the Anglo-Saxons, as they became known, had conquered most of Britain. So obviously the Saxons and the Angles joined together, and the Jutes were obviously in the mix there somewhere. The Anglo-Saxon language was the forerunner to English. During the reign of Charlemagne, now you've heard of Charlemagne, also known as Charles the Great. During the reign of Charlemagne in the 9th century, the Saxons in Germany were forced to accept the Roman Catholic religion. Charlemagne sent armies into the Saxon territory and defeated them. On one occasion, the armies of Charlemagne, and you must remember he's acting on behalf of the Pope. He was the Pope's emperor, Charlemagne. On one occasion, the armies of Charlemagne murdered 4,500 of the principal Saxon men when they refused to give up their general Witikind. So they wouldn't give up Witikind, their general, and so 4,500 of the men were murdered. They were just murdered. Now, that wasn't a war crime, that was okay for the Catholic Church. Charlemagne then forced the Saxons to be baptized as Catholics and to keep the Catholic rituals upon pain of death. So obviously, if they weren't threatened with death, they wouldn't have done, they would have just left it. But he threatened pain of death to force them to do the Catholic rituals, the 7 sacraments, in other words. This type of thing was repeated in many places as the Pope extended his territory at the point of a sword. In the 10th century, Poland was subjugated. About 1000 AD, Norway and Iceland became Catholic, followed by Greenland, Sweden, Denmark, and Hungary. So I think we're going to break it right there. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and carry on with monasticism. See you guys later.